Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. We will be recording this webinar so that we can provide it on our website. We also will be uploading the PDF of the presentation. I'm Krista Ratliff. I work in the Bend office and I'll be discussing the reissuance of the 1200Z, which was effective on October 22nd, 2018. We will be accepting written questions only at the end of this presentation. So please go into the AT&T participation box and send your questions to Mark Rydell. He's here with me today and he'll help me facilitate the Q&A portion of this webinar today. So what we'll be discussing is the reissuance and some of the things that changed, some of the conditions that didn't change. We will have one slide of frequently asked questions. We've been getting lots of questions, and so we thought we would go ahead and address some of the more frequent questions we've been getting. We'll talk about what's coming in the next permit based on the settlement agreements. So again, the reissuance overview, the current permit became effective August 1st, 2017. And then based on that issuance, DEQ had administrative and judicial challenges to that permit. We've been in settlement negotiations and reissued upon those reconsiderations on October 22nd, 2018. The permit expiration remained the same, July 31st, 2022. Some of the conditions that didn't change are the Tier 2 evaluation year. Those stayed the same. Most registrants that were on the previous iteration of the permit will be in the Tier 2 evaluation year this monitoring year. So that is July 1 through June 30, 2018, 2019. So you will be evaluating based on that monitoring data. The DMR supporting documentation hasn't changed. We're still requesting all the lab reports and chain of custody, any pH field notes you might have. We also have frozen the impairment list based on the 2012 303D list and any TMDLs that were in effect May 1, 2017. And the Tier 1 investigation response did not change, so you're still needing to investigate and implement any corrective action due to any exceedance of benchmarks or impairment monitoring. Some of the things that did change is the total zinc benchmark reverted back to 0.12 milligrams per liter from the previous permit. That's for the regional folks that discharge into water bodies that have the regional benchmark. Any impairment exceedance will now require a Tier 1 report to be sent to DEQ or agent within 60 days of receiving the monitoring data. We have gone to quarterly DMR submissions and those deadlines are outlined in the reissued permit. We have clarified the timing of the documentation for monitoring variance. Monitoring sampling frequency has been increased, and the permit has some new language around awareness of TMDLs and impaired waters. So the monitoring frequency which changed is impairment pollutants went from 2 times to 4 times per year. Those of you that have numeric effluent limitation guidelines, you are now required to sample twice up from annual sampling. The monitoring year didn't change, however. It is defined in Schedule D, and it still runs from July 1 through June 30. And that has 2 distinct semi-annual timeframes from July 1 through December 31 and January 1 through June 30. So this table shows up in the permit. It's called Table 6. It is now the quarterly DMR submission and quarters identified. So annual reports are a thing of the past. We now have 4 quarters of monitoring and 4 DMR due dates throughout the year. We'll be talking about the variance requests later, but I do want to point out that if you have no discharge for the semi-annual time frame, those variance requests will be due on the February 15th and August 15th DMRs. So again, talking about DMR reports, there's no DMR due on November 15th of this year. So because the reissuance went into effect in October of 22nd, we're requesting all DMR data to be submitted for July 1, 2018 through December 31, 2018 in that second quarter, but your first quarterly DMR is going to be due February 15, 2019. So that's a big thing for folks to know. That's one of the questions we got a lot of. Is there a DMR due November 15th? And the answer is no. So the DMR forms have been updated. We have had a couple issues with the forms, so please be patient with us, but they have been updated, and the intent was that they were accurate the day that we reissued the permit. So your Tier 2 evaluation year. So most of you, again, are going to be in your Tier 2 evaluation ending at June 30, 2019. So we're requesting that calculation is done on October 15th, 2019 DMR submittal. So again, you'll have 2 quarterly submittals where you'll be reporting your sampling data. One will be that February 29th data, which will include all data that you have, all data results since the last annual data that you submitted on July 31st, 2018, and then the May 2019 DMR. Otherwise, we're not anticipating that as the quarterly DMRs go on that you'll be reporting any past data. So each quarterly DMR will reflect that 3-month previous period. So again, depending on your permit assignment, some of you have had your Tier 2 year be last year or years coming up. But most of you will be in your Tier 2 calculation next year, excuse me. So monitoring variance. A monitoring variance is due when you have no discharge, and you denote that on your DMR due to storm events that do not produce a significant magnitude of rain to produce a runoff. So that's what this monitoring variance is. And you'll document those, you'll send in the supporting documentation in your February and August DMRs for no discharge claims for the 6-month period. So a small change in the monitoring variance condition in the permit went into effect on October 22nd, just to clarify that we want all that supporting documentation at the time of DMR submittal. So that's just a small change. Most people did that anyway, but we just wanted to clarify that for those of us evaluating a no discharge claim, the documentation needs to be submitted at the time of the DMR submittal. And then many registrants have installed infiltration or have implemented ponds to fulfill their Tier 2 mass reduction. And sometimes the volume reduction calculations for those infiltration devices will be needed in order to substantiate your claim. So we do have a fairly new fact sheet. Some of you may have not seen it on the website under technical assistance that outlines some of the things we're looking for when submitting a monitoring variance request. So we'll get into some of the questions we've been getting. Again, just to reiterate, no DMRs due November 15th, 2018. Some people have asked if you've fulfilled all your monitoring for the monitoring year by your 3rd quarter DMR. Is that 4th quarter, August 15th DMR still due? The answer is yes. So regardless of sampling or no discharge or fulfilling your monitoring, quarterly DMRs are due every quarter. Are the SWIP required to be updated? So SWIPs are required to be updated to reflect the changes in the permit and any conditions at your site that may change to reflect the current changes in the permit. So we have sent out new assignment letters that should be replaced, and those indicate the new monitoring frequency. We also included the table 6, which is the quarterly DMR table, to have that as a reference, but there has been some small changes that will be needed to be reflected in your stormwater plan. How do the changes to the permit language affect stormwater pollution control plan revisions and submittals? So the revision criteria didn't change. You're still required to submit a SWIP if you're changing contact, if there was a response to corrective action or inspection, If your operations significantly change the stormwater discharge, or if your monitoring locations have changed. So those may impact some of you, and the requirement is that those revisions, and really only the pages that have been revised, need to be submitted. Most of the SWIP updates based on the renewed or reissued permit will be fairly insignificant, and we're anticipating they won't require a submittal. But please read that Schedule A, Section 8 to make sure if any of the changes to your plan are due to those 4 conditions, that those do need to be submitted. So moving into some of the long-term factors that came out of the settlement agreement, DEQ has agreed to really look at the data as it relates to quality and industry types, also to evaluate the treatment options that are out there, control technologies, and relate those back to the copper, lead, zinc, and TSS pollutants. DEQ will also consider the National Academies of Sciences report that was part of the EPA's 2015, well maybe 2016 settlement agreement, based on their challenge of the multi-sector general permit in 2015. They agreed to fund a report that will look at a lot of the things that we will be looking at in the upcoming years to reflect the changes in the permit. So the National Academies of Sciences had a whole panel committee elected, and they've already done they've requested a lot of input, and they've done many open meetings. Those have closed, and now we're just awaiting the report, which will be very similar to the Natural Resource Council's report on stormwater that was issued in 2008, for those of you that dig into this stuff a little deeper. So that report should be out at the beginning of 2019. We'll also continue to evaluate industrial stormwater discharge as it impacts impaired waters, and to look at any EPA approved TMDLs that have identified industrial stormwater as a potential pollutant. DEQ also will consider Department of Ecology's industrial permit. The most recent permit that Ecology put out, they're actually in the renewal process right now, did actually assign water quality-based effluent limits for certain industries that discharge to impaired waters. So we'll look at the methodologies and the way that they calculate those and evaluate those. And so we've committed to kind of looking at different methodologies, figuring out if some methodologies apply to Oregon better than others, and look at if it's applicable to calculate effluent guidelines based on technology or water quality and benchmarks. So we'll be looking very closely at everything as it relates to monitoring. So Tuesday, myself and others that have been involved in this gave a presentation at the Oregon Business and Industry Trade Group. So some of you may have been there. I made an error and said that SWIP revisions are due within 10 days. So that's incorrect. So I just wanted to call that out here in case I have some repeat listeners. It is 30 days, and so 30 days from the reissuance effective date would be November 21st. And then some of the documents on the website have been screwed up, and we apologize, but the track changes had a couple discrepancies. Most recently today, the track changes was taken off and isn't on there. Hopefully that's gotten fixed. So we are monitoring the website really closely. We really hope to have all the documents updated and uploaded when we uploaded the reissued permits, but we know there has been some errors and discrepancies. So please let us know if you find these, and we're working on it. So the DMR forms that were updated early on, we're missing a couple pages. Hopefully, we're hoping that's been replaced, although we were opening all the documents right before the webinar and noticed some previous versions. So again, we're working on it. We know it. The most recent and accurate DMR will have a revision date of 11/1. So that is going to be the most accurate and hopefully the last revised date, so everyone will know what DMR forms to use. But we have been working on getting all the documents updated. So we will upload a frequently asked question document after this webinar. I hope to get it up by maybe the 13th of the early next week after the holiday. It should reflect a lot of the questions we've gotten from our agents, questions that we discussed today, questions that came in on the webinar that I participated in on Tuesday, and we'll get that uploaded on the website, and hopefully that'll reflect most of the concerns people have. We also have a newsletter subscription. Most of you probably know, but if you are not subscribing to our newsletter, that's a monthly newsletter that gives all sorts of pertinent information and timely compliance tips. And so it's a real good resource for you. If you are not subscribed, you can go to our website and subscribe for that. Real easy. We also are considering doing some trainings, maybe on sample collection, and we're hoping to send a Survey Monkey out to get your feedback on what trainings are most needed. We will be using, I think, the newsletter subscription listserv, because otherwise DEQ's listserv for Stormwater has about 4,000 participants. So we really want to limit this to registrants and kind of get the need of registrants and potentially do some trainings. So again, that's another reason. Please subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't already. We'll be uploading these slides and the recording on the website. We will also upload a PDF of the slides. You probably noticed the presentation today had some live links in it, so that should be an easy way for you to find documents or get DEQ's contact or your agent's contact, which are coming up in the next 2 slides. As always, if you have questions, please call us. Please call your DEQ regional people. Call me, call Mark Rydell, call your agents, and we'll continue and keep you abreast of the renewal process, likely through the website and the newsletter. So here's the DEQ contact information. We have 3 regional offices that manage the stormwater regulatory load. That's the Northwest Region office, the Eugene office, and although the Pendleton office is listed here, the actual technical folks are here in the Bend office. And here's our agent contact information. So we really want you to have names and emails. Again, the names are live links to the contact emails, so you'll have that available, and you could just click on it, and it should open the staff's email address for you. And that's it. I've left about 30 minutes for questions, and so we'll try to hopefully have those compiled and start answering your questions now.
All right, thanks, Krista. So I'm going to go through the questions. Remember, send them to Mark Rydell, and we'll go through as many as we can. So the first question, do the recently issued monitoring waivers, are they still being honored, or are they still in effect?
Yes, all monitoring waivers are still being honored.
All right, and I guess as an aside to that, with the change in impairment frequency, when somebody's applying for a monitoring waiver for an impairment pollutant, can they use their 2017, 2018 monitoring data?
Yes, so the monitoring waiver condition requires 4 consecutive data points under the reference concentration or the benchmark to apply for a waiver. There has been an addition to the permit as it pertains to impairment monitoring that are non-detects. And that condition allows facilities that have 3 or more non-detects to apply for a discontinuing of impairment monitoring as well.
All right, let me see. So another question. How does one complete a DMR when all the monitoring requirements were completed in the 3rd quarter?
You would just say no discharge and cite that all your monitoring requirements have been fulfilled. So that would just be your no discharge documentation. So it's as easy as that.
But a DMR is due every quarter.
A DMR is due every quarter. Partly for just the tracking ease for us, and partly because there's just too many variables to start giving a allowance for a DMR submission excuse or.
All right. So question, the quarterly DMR, the submittals, what needs to be included, assuming that there's either, I guess part A would be data was collected, and part B would be if no discharge was observed. So in a quarterly DMR, is this, the things that DEQ is looking for hasn't changed, if I'm not correct? If I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, so let's see. Let's break that into 2 different questions. So if you have no discharge on the 1st quarter DMR or the third quarter DMR, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly because it is a little tricky. You hand me my permit.
Sorry, we're shuffling papers here, so bear with us for a sec.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so if you have no discharge during July and September, or during January and March, which is less likely, you will submit a quarterly DMR by the due date and say no discharge. And then once your second and fourth DMRs have been submitted and you still haven't fulfilled the semi-annual monitoring frequency of getting 2 impairment sector and statewide benchmarks or 1 numeric effluent limitation. If you still have not fulfilled that in that semi-annual time frame, at the second and fourth DMR, you will submit no discharge, and at that time, you will document why you did not have a discharge for that 6-month period. And you will submit the supporting documentation then. We're just trying to allow for the first and third quarter. There could be an instance where you fulfill it in the second and fourth quarter, so we don't want you to have to submit documentation that is not applicable. And then the other question was, if you have data, the supporting documentation hasn't changed. So if you're submitting a quarterly DMR, we still need the lab results with all the quality assurance and quality control. We need the field notes and the chain of custody. We need non-detects denoted the same way. And so that hasn't really changed. So I hope that was clear.
So we need everything from the permit registrant to determine that those are valid samples, that the quality control was done correctly, kind of as a standalone document, not as a standalone submittal. So we don't have to go back and forth, correct?
Yes.
And let's take another moment here. Can you describe what needs to be submitted as part of a monitoring variance?
Sure. So again, we have a fact sheet that will help you determine the amount of data we're looking for. But if you are unable, if your site did not produce a runoff or there was not a storm event of a significant magnitude to produce a runoff, and you were unable to get a sample, some of the documentation may include rain data from your site or from a other close airport or some other form of rain data. It may include if you have a pond and you are claiming that you only discharge at a certain level of rain due to your engineering calculations and your the amount of water you can store. We want to see that. We want to see operation and maintenance, records that the pond is operating at its intended capacity. And in addition, photos are great. Anything that helps us substantiate that you did not have a discharge.
And I guess we'll stay on DMRs for one more. The question came in, what is the hold time for E. coli under the permit? And I guess I'll field that one. The hold time for E. coli hasn't changed for the permit reissuance. Hold time is based on 40 CFR 136.6. And in that, it states 8 hours. And that's 8 hours to start the preparation at the lab. So if you get it to the lab at 7 hours and 50 minutes, they have 10 minutes to start the preparation. So take that in consideration with that 8-hour hold time. All right, let's keep going. Will DEQ be contacting permit holders with specific monitoring requirements and a new permit cover page?
Most of you probably already received some correspondence for us on this. Some of you may not have, but again, we're trying to be very timely with our correspondence and our documents on the website. So nobody was reissued under this permit. So you're not, the cover letter that was sent out did not give you a new assignment to the reissued permit. So there's kind of 3 documents that we send to folks. One is a cover letter that just kind of explains what we're doing, saying we issued a new permit or reissued a new permit. These are the guidelines. This is some of the links. Please contact us. Please make sure you're following the permit. And so that was what we call kind of the cover letter that was sent out. And we also redid all the permit assignment letters, but we did not send any registrants a new front page of the permit with a new issue assignment letters. So.
All right, thanks. Next question. It's about tier 2. So if a facility gets a waiver for all their benchmark or all their pollutants in their first year, does tier 2 apply to them?
No.
All right, we'll keep going. Let's see. I'm trying to get through them as fast as I can. So we submitted our SWIP in January of this year. It has not been approved. Do we need to update it or resubmit it? And I guess that would be, let's add a caveat to that. Would it need to be updated based on the reissuance of the permit?
Yeah, so most people got their permits in by the deadline, which was set out in the August 1st, 2017 permit, which was December 29th of 2017. Some of you have been working with DEQ or agents to get that revised and accepted. In general, the stormwater plans are deemed accepted if you don't hear from DEQ, your agent, within 30 days. The stormwater plans do need to be revised based on the reissued permit conditions and any changes at your site. The question is, do those need to be resubmitted? Only if you meet the conditions of the submittal under Schedule A8, which is for those revisions that might be due to a change in monitoring location. So I hope that answers your question.
So we got a couple of these questions in, and I think we've answered it, but since we got them in again, I'll ask a question. If all the samples, if no samples were collected during the 4th quarter, but a discharge occurred during the 4th quarter, does the facility still note no discharge on their DMR?
That's an interesting question. Maybe we'll think over this a little better and revise the DMR again. That's a really interesting nuance. The idea is if you've fulfilled your monitoring and if you've fulfilled all your monitoring in a half a year and you have a discharge, you generally don't denote that on your annual DMR. You would just submit the data for your required frequency. So we will note that down and think about it a little more. I don't want anybody indicating something on the DMR, obviously, that's inaccurate. That is not what we want. So thank you for the nuance, and we'll consider that.
So, I mean, one of the questions that came in is the date, I guess the date that the time starts for when revisions are due. Is it based on the reissuance date? Is it based on the date of the letter from the DEQ or the agent? Or is there another date out there or an action out there that would start that timeline?
So as far as your revisions that reflect the permit conditions, those should be done within 30 days of the reissuance effective date, which is November 21st. That's our expectation. We're giving you 30 days from October 22nd to make sure that your permit reflects the